Hello.
Oh, hey.
Welcome to Chronicles of the Phoenix. We have a special guest today, and that special guest is a brand new baby, Greta Lou.
Schnitzel, Frederica, Youngblood.
Thank you. Yes, I couldn't complete the whole name yet.
No, but it's on her tag, the whole name, so you have to listen.
Did you pay extra for that?
You didn't have to pay extra for the full name. On the tag.
This is motivation.
But my daughter was not super thrilled that we put the entire name, but everybody had to win.
Okay.
So my husband got Schnitzel, she got Greta Lou, my son got Frederica Youngblood. So,
You know, I love that for you guys. And
I get an office mate, and you do too. So I win too. I think I'm the biggest winner.
I am too, because I have basically the least amount of responsibility in this decision, and I get puppy snuggles. So we are so happy to have Greta Lou, Schnitzel, Frederica Youngblood here with us today. If you hear her, please know that she has a really cute bark.
She does, and sometimes whimper.
Exactly.
That's how she communicates that she needs to do things. It's a little whimper.
Yes, I love that. She's so dainty. Well, we have a great topic today, I think.
I think so too.
Today, we are going to talk about breaking free from comparison and finding joy through acceptance. And so we wanted to lead today off with a poem from Andrea Gibson's book. The book is You Better Be Lightning, and the poem is called Instead of Depression. Instead of depression, try calling it hibernation. Imagine the darkness as a cave in which you will be nurtured by doing absolutely nothing. Hibernating animals don't even dream. It's okay if you can't imagine spring. Sleep through the alarm of the world. Name your hopelessness a quiet hollow, a place you go to heal, a den you dug. Sweetheart, instead of a grave.
What I love about that poem is the permission that it gives you to just be. In this moment in time, the holidays, there's an expectation that you're supposed to be joyful and excited about what's to come. And in fact, the holidays are often very hard and challenging. We talked about that in our last episode. And a lot of people hold a lot of trauma during this time of year, and also the seasonal affective disorders come as it's the shortest day of the year is coming up upon us. Yep. And it really can be hard for people, and they want to suppress the sadness that they're feeling. And there's a reason for that, and everything that comes to us is happening for a reason, and honoring that. And the more that you push against the emotion, the more it sort of roots into you. And I think that, to me, that's what Andrea was trying to say, is that, I mean, there's a reason that some of our bears hibernate, right? Like it's restoration.
Right. So reframing this idea that depression, yes, exists, and people know that very well. And if we can reframe that from being something that needs to be fixed or changed or is a problem, to recognizing the need for it in some regard, right? That what is the message that we're being sent by our body, by how we're feeling, and reframe that and look at it through a different lens.
Exactly. Yeah. Do you notice the pressure to measure up that gets louder this time of year?
Definitely. I notice, especially since becoming a mom. I mean, my kiddo's 12, but I've felt that pressure much more significantly since having him. A lot of the things that parents are doing now for holidays, traditions, I mean, right, there's so much that can go into it. And I think so much of it is well-intended. People are excited. They have big dreams about what the holiday season is like and could be like. Probably want to do some changing around from what their experience could have been, right? There are the things I think we all love that we carry forward in tradition, and then there are the things we want to do differently. And so with that, I think comes pressure to try to make sure, at least for me as a parent, I'm measuring up and doing as good of a job as other people. And it can be so challenging to think of kids talking about their experiences and does my kid feel as good as that kid after their holiday, or those things. And then I think even personally, the pressure to feel a certain way, like we're talking about, right? It should be happy, it should be joyful, it should be filled with excitement and magic and wonder and love. And oftentimes some of that gets drowned out, I think, by this pressure to do it a certain way.
Yeah. Well, I even think about the silly elf on the shelf
Mm-hmm.
and like the rules that go with it. And I, as you know, don't love rules. I really don't. And I never loved that you weren't supposed to touch the elf. Like, I just thought that that was a silly rule, but there was part of me that was like, it'll ruin the magic, and are you supposed to? And that's what the Friends families all did and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, and then also like having to remember to move it and all the things.
It's a thing.
It's a thing. And my husband was so much better at coming up with creative. He did some really cool things with the elf, but it's a lot. And there was some pressure that I felt like I put on myself for that elf.
Yeah. I think that's exactly it. And I think there's constantly a new thing. I mean, I know that's been around for a while now, but it is newer than, we didn't have that in our generation, and so, yeah, when something's new and exciting and it kind of sweeps, everyone takes over and becomes the thing that people are doing, there's a lot of pressure to keep up with that and to just start doing this new thing that everyone's doing. And then I feel like then it changes to something else.
Yeah.
So not only are we trying to keep up with what it is, but then a new thing comes out and we have to try to do that too, which is what it feels like.
It does. Well, and the parent guilt, right? Like, I know I never grew up with or never did the St. Patrick's Day leprechaun thing.
Oh,
And my kids would come home and share stories about all the leprechauns that
the trap.
destroyed
I've never done a leprechaun trap.
destroyed their
And we're both
tough-
Irish.
We're both Irish, and it just never. And they would feel sad that they didn't have a leprechaun that like made their toilet green and destroyed their house, and and I was like, do you feel bad?
Really into that. I feel like you'd like the leprechaun, to be honest. It sounds right up your alley.
I know, but I wouldn't want to clean up the mess afterwards. So
You don't have to. Someone else could do that.
that's true. That is true.
Yeah.
But shifting a little bit into the topic at hand, we know that social comparison is natural and can harm the well-being when it's constant, right? Like when we're constantly doing it. And frequent upwards comparison to see who's better, right? And is linked to anxiety and lower self-esteem, especially in the age of social media. Social media has really tapped into this and increased that risk. The external motivators have increased appearance, approval, productivity, often override the intrinsic motivators, and that leaves us very disconnected. One book that's become really popular, especially in the school systems, is The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. Are you familiar with that book?
Yeah.
Yeah. And he argues that the shift from a play-based childhood, which we were the last generation of that childhood, to a phone-based childhood coincided with this sharp rise in anxiety and depression among teens, especially girls. And I'm certainly seeing that with my daughter and her friends. And he calls this the great rewiring of childhood. And while his book focuses on kids, it really affects adults. And I certainly can see it in myself, and I certainly see it in friends and in our therapy practice. And it really does pull us away from that intrinsic motivation towards external validation, right? You're looking for the likes. You're looking for how many followers you have on social media. And that's your driver for what house you're going to buy, what car you should get, what friend group is more desirable versus another. It's just
influencer culture.
Influencer culture, right? And we just didn't have that.
Right. And that's why I think prior to this, we talked a lot about media in general, right? It was like magazine ads and commercials and movies and movie stars, right? Like that was what I heard more about, I think, growing up in terms of like not comparing yourself and the ideal body image and those things. But now the exposure to influencer culture and people who appear to be everyday people living their lives, but are also having even more influence, I think, on the lives of both kids and adults by sharing their life experience. But of course, it's, like fake booking kind of stuff, like where you just put out there what feels good and looks good. It becomes the reality, and people think that that is the norm. But to your point about how this also affects adults, I think a huge reason this is a problem with kids is because adults are not able to limit their use of technology.
Yeah.
So for them to also try to regulate the use of their kids' technology, which doesn't mean they don't do it or can't do it, but it becomes a point of contention. I think it's just as hard for some, if not all adults, to limit the exposure they have to social media and that external comparison factor. And that's why a big piece of what we'll also talk about today is alignment and why it's so important. And I think what we know is that the rates of anxiety and depression, as you said, like skyrocketed when phones became central. And so when we have a comparison-driven culture, we're not necessarily aligned with what we believe and value and need. We look outside for that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that experience, that disconnect between our own experience and what we might want and need for ourselves, like at our core, becomes disconnecting, builds anxiety, builds things like depression. I'm curious where you might notice comparison creeping in most in your life right now.
For me personally, I've worked really hard, I think, to not go on social media as much, at least in terms of comparison. And my algorithms are really funny at this point. It's a lot of political stuff and, historical information. And I don't even see a lot of like friend stuff anymore. And I'm not on social media even long enough to see that. So, and I've noticed that since that has shifted, I am doing less of the comparison stuff and worrying less about keeping up with the Joneses, so to speak, in that way. I think where I notice the comparison stuff more, and it's not to say that I don't, but I think where I notice it the most and have the most concerns about it, honestly, is with my kids.
Yep.
And the culture with the teens. And some of that is developmental. But thinking about, again, myself as a kid who did a lot of comparison and certainly more so in the past. And now I feel like it's way more exacerbated in the youth at this point.
Absolutely.
And I guess I will say, if I'm going to be vulnerable, which that's the point of this, is that we live in the original house we ever bought, right? From when we were first married. So it's a small home and it works for us. It's nice and quaint. It gets tight with one shower for all of us, but and we've talked about wanting to move into a bigger house where we have more room to spread out and all of that. And I'd love a bigger closet and all of the things. And I think I have sometimes I have comparison of that, of feeling like it's a measure of success of how big your house is. And I've worked really hard and I've held high level positions, yet I still live in this small house. So does that mean that I'm not as successful as, in terms of the comparison and the stories that I tell myself? So I feel like that might be one place that I've had in the past that I've really tried to work towards letting go, but also saying like, but I have a really great interest rate and a very low mortgage. So it's actually
it sounds
great. This is pretty good.
Yeah. I think that's a common area where people have comparison. I think you and I both have a shared experience of living in towns that some people have great wealth. We may not be the people in town that have that level of wealth. Not to say we're not, grateful for what we have, just like you're saying. But the comparison level in that way is high because it's not just comparing yourself up against people who are sort of in the same range. I mean, sometimes it's like our kids will go to other people's houses and come back and be like shocked that a house like that exists and had never seen that before. And yet these are their peers. And so that comparison, I think, is very strong. And you really have to get rooted in what your values are
Yeah.
and connect in with that, just like you described. And yes, there could be some practical things that feel good about what your home is like. But a piece of that is also what you're valuing. You know, if I'm valuing that practicality because I like to have money to do X, Y, and Z and not necessarily put into my house and be house poor, that's an important value that your family holds, which has probably kept you doing what you're doing.
It's that, and it's letting go of what was defined as the American dream and constantly
Yes.
like leveling up, which was something that was defined to me through the years. And I moved all the time as a kid, and we constantly did level up in our houses. So I think that that was something that was maybe an implicit bias to me.
Mhm.
But then I also, when I think about my values and what our home has, it's warmth, it's character, it's connection, it's history.
Yep.
And those are very connected to my values. So when I think about that, and then when people share with me the feeling that they have when they come into my home, I'm grateful that we have this home, because
Yes.
people do feel very accepted and loved and
Mhm.
comfortable when they come into my home. And that's all I'd ever want.
That's what it's all about.
Yeah.
That's great. So we've mentioned a few times already this idea of intrinsic motivation. So I thought it would be helpful for us to define it a little bit. And with the self determination theory, Deci and Ryan define intrinsic motivation as doing something because it feels meaningful. So being able to internally decide what's meaningful to us, much like you're talking about. And that is our driver. That's our motivation for what we do. And what we know about that is that it predicts better performance, creativity, and psychological wellness. And we know that intrinsic motivation thrives when these three things are met: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So I just thought that was an interesting way to look at it and define this sense of how we act in alignment with what we feel is meaningful to us as individuals or to us as a family, up against external motivators, which we've talked a lot about: the social media, the pressures, the American dream. And so I think within that, social media has also trained us to seek external validation. Like, it's purposefully created so that we look for things like getting likes and comments, and rather than checking in with ourselves internally and using those cues to drive our behavior, we end up getting sucked into driving the behavior externally.
Do you notice comparison online changes your motivation?
Yeah, I think comparison online is something that shifts what I'm motivated towards in a way. I find that I definitely am someone who can see something and say, wow, that looks really good, or I want to try that. And what I mean by that is, we're talking a lot about Enneagram here. As an Enneagram 9, one of the things that is a big component of my personality and something I have to always kind of pause myself around is I can merge. And what that means is that you can take perspective so often from people that you end up sort of merging your interests or what you desire, what you like, with other people. You lose sight of your own intrinsic motivation. I would say, like, that's a huge piece of what gets lost sometimes, because it's in an effort to connect. And even though that's like the opposite of connection, right? So for me, I would say relating that to something online, right? I can see so many things like my peers are doing or what other people my age are engaging in, and want to have those things, or wonder, oh, I want to join that person to do that really fun thing they did. Or this family just went on this vacation. Like, that's such a great idea. And it might start from a positive place of sparking some kind of motivation in me to look into that or try to research it. But oftentimes I can get so far down that path that then I'm losing sight of, like, do I even want that? Is that something I personally want or want for my family? And then I have to pause and directly ask that question.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And it is that slowdown part, because I think that that's the other thing that can happen in the social media realm, is that numbing. And that's part of it, right? Like, you almost disassociate. So
Right.
if it becomes this automatic, then you don't even think about it. So you have to be very intentional to slow down and ask that question and check in with yourself.
Yep.
Like, is this me, or is this everybody else.
Right. And I'm really grateful for, in more recent times, the motivator for me to really question like where information comes from. And you spoke to what your feed looks like was like political things and information. I'm especially with AI and that sort of being in the forefront of everything. I think there is a bit of a shift around really questioning where information comes from. So I will say that does interrupt this for me a little bit. It causes me to take pause and go, is what I'm consuming actually a thing? Or is this just something kind of created and made up? Or is this something aligned with what I want to be consuming?
Yeah.
So I have found a shift there that has been helpful recently.
It's wild though, because you can get sucked into, I know I was at the gym and got sucked into something on one of the TVs in there, and it was propaganda television, and my brain went to wild places. And it wasn't a program I usually watch.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, and it's crazy like what can happen to your brain intentionally. Like that's what the intention is.
No. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Right. So all the more reason to have to really hone in on what this intrinsic motivation is for us.
yeah. So I think the challenge really is how do you move towards acceptance?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And we know that acceptance reduces stress and improves emotional well-being. It's a core of the acceptance and commitment therapy and mindfulness approaches.
Mm-hmm.
I know that you use that a lot in
Yep.
your practice. And it doesn't mean passivity. I think that's what a lot of people think, but it means listening and responding in alignment with your values.
Mm.
And I think that kind of goes back to Andrea Gibson's poem in that accepting your sadness,
Mm-hmm.
right? Accepting whatever your values are that might be different than mainstream and being okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
And moving forward and accepting that maybe you're not a gym person.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you're not the 180 grams of protein a day person, like whatever the trend of the day is that
Yep.
you have. The external input is telling you you're supposed to do in perimenopause, for example.
Yep.
And then that's not really what is intrinsically your value.
Yep.
Accepting that and then moving forward, or accepting that I'm sad even though it's September, or
Mm-hmm.
I'm sad even though it's December.
Mm-hmm.
And I need to allow myself to sit in the sadness now. And maybe if I sit in it, I can move to happiness, but maybe I won't. And that's okay.
Mm-hmm. I love that point. I think that is absolutely the key to how we refocus ourselves on what we actually need, because we're not resisting. We're not feeling as though we have to push back against what is naturally happening. We can allow it to be there. We can notice it and know that, like many, many things in life, things come in cycles, things come and go, that the present moment won't feel the way that it feels forever. And I know we've talked about that too, as a concept that is important. And the less we resist, the more easily we can actually move through something. So with all that in mind, how do you stay aligned with your feelings and not force yourself to move to something new that might be more of a supposed to feeling or a better feeling? Like you're saying in December, I'm sad, but what's your method for staying aligned with that?
What I think about, if an example that I have very recently is December is the anniversary of losing my brother.
Mm-hmm.
And it was 3 years. I think I mentioned that recently. And I had a really busy day in practice and saw clients and I went through my day, and I think I was just kind of numb most of the day. And I don't know what I was feeling, like I think that I compartmentalized.
Yep.
I didn't really process. I think at some point I didn't even remember that it was the anniversary. We had a Zoom meeting with my siblings and my parents and sort of talked about it and processed. And that allowed me to kind of access a little bit of what I was feeling and processing. And I went home, and it was still, and I think that I was still trying to avoid it, because that's a little bit of what sevens do. And I wanted to watch just a show that had nothing to do with anything to continue to numb.
Mm.
And eventually I just allowed myself to, I created space. I went upstairs and allowed myself the space to just breathe and grieve and
Mm.
take the time to process the loss. And it's not, I mean, that was the anniversary and that was a very specific day, and grief comes in waves and it's not a one day thing, obviously. But I think that it's an example of, I guess, sometimes I have to honor the fact that I have to compartmentalize
Yeah.
and I have to get the job done and stay in what I need to focus on in the moment. And then sometimes I need to let the walls down and be in my feels
Mm-hmm.
and figure out the timing of when that's okay for me. And I guess it's discernment for me of when each of those are okay and learning how to do that.
Mm. Yeah. You said a couple of really important things, I think, in what you shared. And I think when you talk about compartmentalization, it's different than stuffing things down, right? Even numbing is different than stuffing emotion. And I think the distinction is that you know it's there. You know you're in a space where you're really in it with grief or you're experiencing loss or remembering things, and that's something, yes, it could take your attention away and could be the focus, but you sort of found a way to box it up.
Mm-hmm.
Know it's there. You still see the box on the shelf. It's not hidden from your view. And then find the time and space that's right for you to open that up and access what you're feeling, and not necessarily get it out of sight, out of mind, but really just allow yourself to see that it's like a box on the shelf.
Yeah. And then I needed to contain it again.
Mm-hmm.
So I watched that show
Yeah.
that
Mm-hmm.
helped me
Yeah.
put it back together and
Yeah, and do that in the moment if that's what you needed. And I think the other thing you mentioned was you had this scheduled call with your family. I think creating a space to talk about things is always helpful. And I think when we are trying to own our experience and our emotions, one of the best ways to do that is to find a trusted person to talk to and to open that up with, who you can be vulnerable with and feel comfortable with. And in this case, you all had this shared trauma and this shared loss that it sounds like kind of you preemptively planned to have a space to be able to have that if anyone needed that, which I think is pretty beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's still a work in progress, but I think that
Absolutely.
that's where we're at.
No, I'm glad you shared that. I think that's a powerful example.
Height says risky play builds resilience. Do you think adults need a version of that? And how does trying something new or imperfect help us feel aligned?
Ooh, this is a juicy one. I love this question. First of all, I love this concept. I think that this is actually something my husband and I talk a lot about because he's a preschool teacher. And so they do a lot of training at work around risky play, actually, and meaning like allowing children to be able to, right? That everything isn't like a no, stop, don't climb that. Like, how can we safely take risk and learn to gain competence through that and push the boundaries a little bit, but recognize that actually does help us in the long term. And so I think when you translate that to adults, we often stray away from that. I think we try to hone in on what we're good at and put our energy into that. That becomes our career. It becomes where we put our focus. And even though that can be messy, we often don't spend as much time in this idea of risky play, in this idea of doing something that we're not perfect at or that feels imperfect to us. And that could look different for everybody. I know for a lot of me and my friends, we're musicians. And so I see music as a piece of that, even though I don't know that everyone would think it's risky play. Like being out performing, like writing your own songs and putting them out in the world is a scary, vulnerable thing to do. But so is like trying to write a song with like 5 other people and see if they like it and can we make it gel. And like there's so many layers to it that feels messy. But to me, that serves that function for me. It's a space where I can take risk and learn and grow and ultimately build that resilience that it's okay if things don't go well. It's okay if we try this thing and it is terrible. We decide to scrap it and never go back to it because it really didn't work. That's okay. It doesn't have to offend me, but it can also help me recognize that when it does go well, it's very powerful. And all of that is because I've leaned into the vulnerability it takes to like put yourself out there, which for me is a practice I don't do a lot in other ways. Like I'm not a super extroverted human being. I think in some of my personal relationships, I, have like a bigger personality, but in the world, I find that I'm not necessarily like wanting to be out there all the time. So that is what I would say.
I think the biggest way I'm doing that right now is this podcast.
For real. I'm like talking like, oh my God.
I mean, it was as someone that like in person when I go out there, I'm totally willing to be a goofball and stuff, but being vulnerable in a public space and like putting myself out there on social media and my daughter's like telling us you need to do reels and stuff like that, and I'm like, no, I don't want to. So this has been a fun, vulnerable experience, and I'm grateful for all the positive feedback that we've gotten so far. But it's been rewarding, and we've learned a ton.
So much.
But
absolutely,
I definitely think that it is something that is helping us feel aligned.
Mm-hmm. This conversation has made me think a lot. I'm still thinking right now.
Yeah,
we're talking, and I feel like if we want to frame this into takeaways for people, I think we have a few things that we hope people can take from this conversation today. One of which is taking some micro steps and giving yourself permission to start tiny. I think that so often when we do want to make change or we do want to decide what's in alignment for us, we set the bar really high. And then again, that pressure can sometimes prevent us from feeling successful. I think the other thing that we can do is to give ourselves a values check. Check in with yourself if your action is aligned with what you truly want, and ask yourself that. Is what I'm doing right now aligned with what I want? And the last is to take a risk, like we just talked about. Come up with something that you can do imperfectly, messy, vulnerable, and see how that feels.
Yeah. So, in closing, we hope that you choose presence and alignment over comparison. And we want to close with one more Andrea Gibson poem. This is called Wellness Check. In any moment, on any given day, I can measure my wellness by this question. Is my attention on loving, or is my attention on who isn't loving me?
That's it right there.
Yeah.
I love that.
Have a great couple weeks.
Take care.